The next thing I want to take you through is advanced framing techniques. There's a list of different things that we like to do in every one of our walls, and the main reason why we do it is we want to be able to put as much insulation as the wall as we can. I mean, it's obvious, would you rather have wood insulating your house or would you rather have insulation? And going through a house and structuring a house, if you meet with any framer, there's a lot of different things that they like to do and a lot of things that they just do to help the drywall trades. They'll be able to help the siders. They throw a lot of extra wood in the wall just to help the other trades. Well, when we're trying to get as much insulation in the wall as possible, there's some different techniques that we need to walk them through to make sure that we're doing that. The first one on here is what we call a California corner or a two-stud corner. Now, typically, this would be blocked and you would have a piece of wood here, and what happens is we get in this corner of the house, we get all this wood. Well, if you've ever seen a house with a thermal camera or had any problems in a house with the cold areas in here, again, with no insulation in this corner, we have all this area that gets very cold inside here. So what we do is when we put our walls up together, we don't put a back piece here, and a piece will typically get put there for the cider to attach something to. We do not put a piece here, which is another piece that gets also stuck there for the drywaller to do. In our homes, we do drywall clips, so we don't need that extra piece of wood in the wall as it is. But if you can see here, now when we come in and put in our bibs for our insulation, we can get insulation all the way back around this back wall and not have any of those problems where we get all that wood in the corner. Another technique we utilize is 2x6, 24 inches on center. Typical wall construction will have either a 2x6 or a 2x4, and then every 16 inches on center. Again, if I'm looking at this from an insulation standpoint, this 5.5 inch or 2x6, if I go straight through, is an R6 for an R value. When I put in my bibbed insulation, that's an R23. So every time I have a piece of wood that's showing up in my wall, again, that's heat transferring through this wood to the outside, and everyone knows you'd rather have R23 than R6. One big question though that gets brought up by people is the structural integrity. By doing 2x6, 24 inches on center and paying attention to how we carry our loads with our roof trusses and our floor trusses, we don't take a chance at compromising our structural integrity. Minimum code is going to require in this house, if you were to still stay with the 2x6 construction, is that you fill this cavity full of insulation. If you want to stay with the 2x4 construction, what it's going to require you to do is either put your batter, you can still do the bib, but on the exterior you're going to have to do a minimum R5 exterior foam board. For our construction in this particular wall, we're staying with the 24 inch on center. We're going to fill it with an R23 bib, and on the exterior we're going to have 2 sheets of 6.5 inch R value foam board. What that gives us for a total insulation value on this wall is an R36. One of the key things you're doing when we put that foam board, and why we put the foam board actually on the exterior, is if you can envision when we put the drywall on top of this wood, heat can still transfer right through this wood into the outside. Even on a well-built house, if you were to stand out here in a cold day with a thermal camera on the wall, you're going to see all these weak points in the wall with this wood in there. So by putting a foam board on the exterior, it stops what's called thermal bridging, and that's at all these wood points where heat transfers from the inside to the outside. We've actually added R13 on the exterior of that to help break up that heat loss. While it's important we're doing all these different things in the house for energy efficiency and to help make it comfortable, health's important, but one thing that we have to pay attention to and understand is how we're dealing with moisture in a home. If I want to contrast the way we're building this house with, let's say, minimum code, it doesn't matter if it's a 2x6 wall or a 2x4 wall, the house would have, after this OSB, would have a house rep on the outside. In the wintertime, here's what happens, is any moisture that makes it into my wall cavity gets on the back of my wood, and this gets so cold during the wintertime that any moisture that makes it in this wall cavity will actually condense. And what happens is with our tieback is we can actually still dry to the outside. In fact, if you did any kind of study, you could show how many hours a wall gets wet and dries in a winter season. The way we constructed this house though, however, for wintertime is we have an R13 foam board on the outside. Basically, I'm making all the moisture that's in this wall, instead of having the ability to dry to the outside, I'm forcing my house to dry to the inside. And that can be against some modern rules of thumb and things that are out there, but the way we've constructed this house, we specifically understand that this wall's not going to get wet again. The way we've constructed it, and I'll show you in other clips, is how we've protected this wall structure and forced the inside. So technically, all that has to dry to the inside is the moisture that's in the wood originally. Now, before we close this house in, we're actually going to go through and measure the moisture content in each one of my studs. And if any of this is still wet, I'll need it to get it to dry before I seal it up and seal that moisture in here. Another one of our advanced framing techniques, and again, it's just so that we can get more insulation in the wall, is what we call an insulated header. Now, typically what will happen in this kind of construction is you're going to have this area actually be entirely full of wood. It's just easier for the framer when they're framing it out and just natural to just stick as much wood in that area as possible. So purposely what we have to come back and do is just use one header on top and leave us enough space to be able to get at least a minimum R5 insulation inside here. How this is going to look is when they come through and net the walls before they blow this insulation in, is this will just have netting on it. And so when we come back and look at this will be full of insulation and all we'll see is those two studs coming through there. Again, this is going to allow us, instead of having with the R value of wood at R1, or we can choose to have the insulation from R3 to R5, obviously we want more insulation. So instead of having this huge area of wood straight through to the outside, we're able to get a good insulation break on the inside of this wall. Current minimum code is now going to require that you follow a checklist in going through the thermal bypasses in a home. And simply put, a thermal bypass is anywhere where we're going to be transferring heat, transferring air leakage through the home back in places where we really can't see. If I were to cut a hole in the ceiling, you know to place something over that hole because we don't want to have air leakage. Well, what can happen, and to pick this area in particular, is it's become more common to have all kinds of ups and downs and coffers and different things in the ceiling. Well, every time we do that and we change our ceiling heights, that leaves a big gaping hole inside of our structure. Now, in the break above this, what I've done is I've backed this knee wall that goes back into the attic, and I've left this open so that I can show you the two differences. Most homes will actually get drywall on both sides of this, and that will never get addressed in a house. And what can happen is we can get air from the attic that'll come down into this wall cavity, and now my house is actually connected to the attic completely everywhere that there's a penetration. So all this big area up this wall cavity, I'm constantly changing air with the attic, which is outside air, and then in my inside air. So by going through and backing this area and spray foaming it, I can stop this thermal bypass so that I'm not losing so much energy and creating so many problems. The other thing too that's in this chase cavity is we have a plumbing stack that goes up through there, and then also wiring. What has to happen in these situations is every connection with the outside has to have some kind of spray foam or mastic so that we have no chance of transferring air in between the attic and our house. So simply put, putting spray foam in each one of those areas, spray foaming around this chase wall, is going to be able to handle those problems so that we're not exchanging air with the outside. What we're looking at here is what we would call an attic knee wall. And what this is we're starting down here at a 9-foot ceiling, and it's a place where we're jumping up to a 10-foot ceiling. And what that does is that leaves this area exposed in between here, so that if I didn't have this backing board, I could actually reach my hand down into the wall cavity. Well, if you go up into most homes that don't do any backing like this, you can go up into the attic, and anytime you have any kind of air movement, you can feel actually the warm air from the house coming up through the wall cavities and into the attic. There's two ways to do this. One way is you can have your framer actually back this area with OSB, and when you're done, when he's done and you're doing your ceiling on the attic side, you can come through and spray foam this. The other way you can do it is how we've done here, is we've actually taken foam board as a backing material, gone through, nailed it into the studs, and then spray foamed it from there. I'm out here on the exterior of our house, and I want to show you how we insulated the exterior using the exterior sheeting. What we did on this particular house is do two 1-inch sheets of polyiso foam board. And for each of those foam boards, that's an R6.5, giving us a total of R13 sitting on the outside of our wall. And again, that's not counting the R23 that we have in the cavity, but it's these two together that gives that wall an R36. You can't see it how we did this, but what we go through is we put down and completely sheeted the exterior with OSB. Then we came behind it and we put in sheets of this 4x8 foam and taped every one of the seams. After we were done putting on the first layer, then we went through and did a second layer on top of this. So there's actually two of these sheets around this entire exterior of the house. On the areas where we're going to do half this house is going to be siding, half of it's going to be brick. And on the areas where it's siding, we can't attach a product like hardy board through 2 inches of foam with one screw and then into our stud without having it staying or sagging or having any problems with it. So we actually went through and did, as I'm showing you here, is this 1x4 strapping that we matched up with every one of the studs at 24 inches on center, and then we're actually attaching our cement board siding right through those strapping pieces and into the stud. Also, the additional thing that this does for us is it gives us that just ½ inch gap in between the siding and the flashing, so that any moisture that would make it behind onto the foam board will actually just drain right down the house and down into the ground. Under number 6 in our building technology options brochure, another framing technique that we like to implement is what's called a raised attic heel truss. The entire purpose of this is to take the roof system and raise it 6 inches to 16 inches up off the top plate of our wall. What we're able to accomplish at that point is to get more insulation out over the end of your wall. If you can picture, we're going to put drywall up here, and then we blow in our insulation. Raising our roof line from the top plate all the way up here allows us to get full insulation value all the way out to the outside of our house. In typical roof truss configuration, that truss is actually going to sit right on top of this outside wall plate. And what that does is not allow enough insulation to get out over this top plate. In an attic, we want anywhere from R38 to R60. Well, if I only have 3 inches of coverage between my top plate and my roof deck, I only have the option for up to R19 insulation in there. So by propping this roof truss up 6 to 16 inches higher, it allows me to get the full amount of insulation all the way out over the top side. The other component that's really important is we're purposely cutting holes outside to get enough air to move from our soffit vent all the way up to our roof vent up top. But we don't want, when all that air is coming in, to blow our insulation back, so it's necessary for us to use attic baffles. These baffles are going to help take the air from our soffit vent and move them up to our exterior roof vent without causing any problems with our insulation. But when we do a raised attic heel truss, that creates an additional problem, because now we've given more room for air to blow our insulation back into the middle of our ceiling area. So to combat that, first in this construction we will actually cut pieces of foam board or OSB and fit them in each of these cavities, then taking a spray foam gun and making sure we go around all the way around these penetrations. And in some cases we'll actually put our attic baffle in there, and in this case we also already did foam, sprayed it around this area, and we're forcing that air, which we don't want to stop, we're forcing that air from the soffit and up into the attic without having any risk of blowing our insulation off our top wall plate. At this stage in construction, most of the time this is done before electrical and plumbing gets done. So it's always important to come back and check your penetrations before you do your drywalling. In this specific case, we've got wiring that's gone through our top plate, and we've also got wiring that's cut through our attic baffle. So we're going to need to come back here and spray foam from the attic side, and it doesn't hurt to do it from both sides, but at least do it from one side. And then go into any time our baffle is cut and spray it with a little bit of additional foam, again to ensure that we don't have any insulation pushing away from that top plate. An additional framing technique we like to do under number 6 in the brochure is ladder blocking. In typical construction, we're going to take this partition wall all the way back and either attach it or it'll have full contact with our OSB on the outside of our house. And what is going to happen here is it's not allowing us to prevent thermal bridging in the house. We're going to have heat that's going to transfer in or out of the house directly from our wall to the outside with no chance of insulation breaking that up. So what we've done is put in these 2x4 scabs, which we call ladder blocking, and we actually attach the wall to this so the wall can be securely attached, yet still give us the opportunity to completely fill this cavity with full 6-sided insulation. We can get insulation all the way to the front of this cavity, to the top and to the bottom without having any problems.